I'm told that you were in the middle of a sugya yesterday at the very top line of DAF Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph. It started with a question that Rami Bar Chama had asked on DAF Chaf Amud Beis towards the bottom. And the question really that he asks is that we know that the material that the husband writes the get on has to belong to him, and in order to effect that severance that takes place between the husband and wife when he presents her with the get, he has to transfer ownership of the writ from himself to her. So the question that Rami Bar Chama asked was, what if he takes a material, like he takes a tray that belongs to his wife, and he writes the get on it? There was never any explicit exchange that his wife made to give him the tray. So do we assume that because this is part of the process that, do we say aknuye aknisale? Do we say that we can assume that she gave the tray over to him to use as he wished so that this could affect the get? Or maybe she doesn't even know what the mechanism is. She doesn't have that sufficient knowledge necessary, and therefore the get is completely invalid. So the Gemara went through a few discussions, and then we're up to the first line on Daf Chaf Aleph. Ela Omar Rava Mehacha. We may be able to derive an answer from here. Arev hayotze la'achar chisim shtaros gova minachasim b'nei charin. That, let's derive it from here. There's a halacha that if a person lends another person money, he can ask for a guarantor, which is what we call an arev. He says, I'm willing to lend you the money, but I need a guarantor. Well, the thing is, in this case, the fellow Reuven already lent Shimon the money. The shtar for the promissory note was already written and signed, and only afterwards Reuven says, I really would feel more comfortable if I had a guarantor. And Levi's willing to step in and act as the guarantor. But you have already written up the promissory note, so what happens is that no problem, says Levi, I'll just sign beneath the witness's signature on the promissory note. So the Gemara there says that because this is after the fact, and it's not part of the public drafting of the promissory note, no one's necessarily going to know that Levi has subjugated his assets to this debt, and therefore, even though if Shimon defaults on the loan, it's legal for Reuven to go to Levi to collect, but Reuven can only collect from Levi's unencumbered property. Anything that had already been spoken for, where there was a lien or a sale created, Reuven will not be able to collect from. So the Gemara wants to bring a raya from this. Rava wants to bring a raya from this as follows. What do we see from this? We see that even though the note already belongs to the lender, to Reuven, the only way that this debt can be generated from Levi, the guarantor, to Reuven is if there's an exchange of paper. But there is no exchange of paper over here because the paper is already in Reuven's possession. What we have to conclude is that there's an implicit exchange, that Reuven basically says to Levi implicitly, not explicitly, but implicitly here, before you sign the paper, bikona the paper, so that when you give it back to me, that will create the exchange necessary to create your indebtedness on this loan. So the Gemara therefore wants to prove, or Rava wants to prove, that you see that there's an implicit understanding that when you want a mechanism to work, either a get or a kinyan or a generation of debt, there's an implicit transfer of paper, even though nothing has been stated. So the Gemara now says, Amar Ravashi my kushya, Dilma Gavra Shaini Diadala Knuye. So Ravashi says, is that what's the question? In other words, how are you going to be able to bring a raya from there? He says, because maybe men are different from women. It's a bit of a sexist statement, but maybe only men implicitly know that they have to make this exchange of paper. Maybe women are oblivious to this idea, and I'm just thinking maybe it's not so much even a question. It's either a question of education, that women in this time are less educated than men; they don't know the halachas as well, or perhaps the mentality of a woman is not to be as willing to give up her possession as a man is. It's not clear from the Gemara. But in any event, so the Gemara says, Ela Omer Ravashi Mehacha, but rather Ravashi says we can prove it from here. That Isha Koseves is Gita v'il Ish Kosef es Shovro she'en kiyum haget ela b'chosmav. That the Gemara's the teaching is from here. We'll see this either in a Bryce or a Mishnah later on. That let's say a man and a woman want to get divorced. It's legal for the woman to draft the get, and as long as the witnesses sign it, once she's drafted it, and the man gives it to her, it's perfectly legal. Similarly, when a woman wants to collect her ksuva, and the halacha is that once the husband pays the ksuva, she, according to some minhagim, she's supposed to write him a receipt. It's called a shover, saying that she's received the full amount of the ksuva. The husband can legally write the shover and then give it to her and have the edim sign afterwards, and then she'll give it back to him. So what you see from here is that there's no distinction being drawn between men and women. A woman can write up her get, and she does have the knowledge to implicitly transfer ownership of that parchment with the ink on it over to the man, so that when he gives her the get, it's a valid severance, it's a valid divorce. And that concludes that question of Rami Bar Chama. This answers Rami Bar Chama's question. Yes, it is okay, as long as we assume that a woman is merutza, as long as she wants the husband to divorce her. It would seem that she implicitly transfers ownership of that tray that Rami Bar Chama was talking about to the husband, so that it'll be a proper get. Amar Rava, Kasav laget v'nasno biyad avdo v'kasav lashtar matana alav kan aso umiskareshes bo. So Rava says an interesting halacha. A man writes a get to his wife, and instead of giving it to her directly, he places it in the hand of his servant. He then gives his wife a present and says, "Here, sweetheart, here's a piece of paper that says that you are the new owner of my servant. I'm giving my servant to you as a gift. Mazel tov." And she thinks that this is a beautiful gift, and then it turns out that she's in for a big surprise, because concomitant with the acquisition of the slave also comes her divorce. I just saw a little video clip that they made before the Christian holiday, right? That a husband and wife are arguing Christmas morning, and then all of a sudden he says, "Shh." He gives her a set of keys, and then she opens up the front door. It's a new car. "Oh, I love you, I love you." She gets into the car, starts the engine, and it explodes. So this is a similar situation. He's giving her a wonderful gift, but really it's exploding in her face. So Rava says that this is a legal thing. In other words, with the acquisition of the slave, concomitant with the acquisition of the slave is her divorce. Va'amai. So the first Gemara's question is, Chatzer mahalechesi, v'chatzer mahaleches lo kana. But why should that work? It's a traveling or movable chatzar, and we know from other gemaras that in order for a chatzar courtyard to be kona for you, in order for my real estate to be kona, it has to be completely stationary. And this Eved is not stationary. So the Gemara says, "V'chi tema ba'omed." Maybe you'll tell me the Eved is standing. He is stationary, and therefore it's legal. But v'hama Rava kol she'ilu mahalech lo kana omid v'yoshev lo kana. But Rava says that's still not going to work, because regardless of whether the moving chatzar is stationary or not, the very fact that it is movable makes it no longer valid to affect the kinyan. So the hilchasa bekafos. So the Gemara says the only way to resolve this is to say that the Eved is tied up, so that he's not movable. In other words, his legs have been bound, and he's not able to walk. And there, by placing it in his hand and then giving the Eved to his wife, it acts as a kinyan chatzar. So it's just the same as if I put a get in my wife's courtyard, that would make her legally divorced. So too, her Eved is kained on my behalf. Now you might argue that she only acquired the Eved after the fact, after I put it in his hand. The fact, however, is that since I'm the one who's creating a transfer from myself to my wife, therefore her acquisition of the get is concomitant with her acquisition of the chatzar, and therefore it's legal. We're going to see a contrast to that in a moment. That's where I'm introducing that. Va'amar Rava further says, "Kasav laget v'nasno b'chatzero v'kasav lashtar matana alav kan also miskareshes bo." Rava says a very similar halacha. Let's say a man takes the get and deposits it in his own chatzer, and then gives his wife a piece of paper that gifts her the chatzir. So she's the happy new owner of a chatzir, but she's also divorced simultaneous to that. Utzricha. So why did Rabbi have to make both statements? They seem to be really saying the same thing. The Gemara says no. The Gemara says, I'll tell you why. You really, if Rabbi would have only told me the halacha by an eved, I would have thought that only by an eved is she legally divorced in this manner. But maybe the Chachamim would make a special gezerah, a special takana, that if a man tries to do that with his real estate, with his courtyard, it's not going to work. Why? Because let's say we're dealing in a case where there's a third party. In a case where there's a third party, let's say a man wants to divorce his wife, so he puts the get in Yankel's courtyard, and then Yankel sells his courtyard to the woman. In that situation, she's not legally divorced, because the Torah says, v'nosan, the man has to give it directly to the woman. He hasn't given it to her directly. He's deposited it in a place that is not hers, and only afterwards she acquires that place. So there's been no direct connection between his giving and her receiving. And therefore, in that case, it's not a valid get. It's only valid because here, in our case, he's actually giving her the courtyard, and concomitant with him giving her the courtyard, he's giving her the get as well. So you might have thought that because in the case of a third-party courtyard it doesn't work, we should be gozer and say that even when it's his courtyard it doesn't work. Kamash Malon, that's why he had to tell me the halacha that even in a courtyard it works as long as it's his, and he gives it to her. And v'iyash minan chatzir havamina davka chatzir vol eved ligzar kafus atusheno kafus kamash Malon. And if I only had the case of Rava's statement of that it works in a courtyard, maybe only there by real estate would we say that it works, but maybe with an eved who's tied up, maybe we would argue that the Chachamim would be gozer and say that no, even a tied up eved who's not movable presently cannot be used, lest you come to use an eved that's not tied up and is therefore movable and it won't work. So Kamash Malan. Tosfos, by the way, points out that not only does he have to be tied up, he also has to be sleeping, so that he can't untie himself and is really just completely out of it. And therefore he's like a lump of flesh that works. It's a completely immobile chatzir. Amar Abaye, mechdi chatzir mehecha is Rabbi miyada, mayada de isa bein midaita ubein bal karcha, av chatzera de isa bein midaita ubein bal karcha. Vahamatana midaita isa bal karcha lesa. So this is the totality of Abaye's question. I'm going to try and explain it as best as way I understand it. I hope I'm saying it correctly. He says like this. He says there's a chisaron in the mechanism here. Now, what do I mean by that? There's a deficiency in the mechanism. Whenever you're using a mechanism of giving a woman a get, it has to be a mechanism whereby it conforms to the process of giving a woman a get. When you give a woman a get, it doesn't have to be with her assent. It doesn't have to be of her own volition. I can force a woman to accept the get. If I put the get in her hand, even if she doesn't want to be divorced, perforce she is divorced. If I put a get in my wife's courtyard, even if she doesn't want to be divorced, she's divorced. It's now in her possession. The mechanism that you're using to divorce your wife in this case is a mechanism of gifting. You're gifting her the eved. You're gifting her the courtyard. The mechanism of gifting is a mechanism which does not work bal karcha. Cannot be. You can't give a person a gift against their will. So therefore, Abaye's problem is that the whole mechanism that you're utilizing to divorce her is not in consonance with the whole process of giving a woman a get. It's a mechanism that is deficient, because if the mechanism of divorcing a woman works bal karcha, and this only works biritzon midaita, then it's not the proper mechanism of divorcing a woman, and therefore it shouldn't work. That's what midaita of her volition. Right? It shouldn't. Therefore, it shouldn't work. It shouldn't work over here. That's Abaye's argument to Rava. So maskef la Rav Shimi bar Ashi v'hashlichos lekabola demidaita isa bal karcha lesa v'kahavi shliach lekabola. So Rav Shimi challenges this, and he says, well, I'll show you an example of how a mechanism which normally has to be of a person's volition can still work with a get. He says, look at shlichus, look at proxyship. I can give a get to my shaliach, and tell my shaliach, you're accepting this on behalf of the woman, and therefore deposit it in her chutzner, put it in her hand, and she's thereby divorced even though it's against her will. And normally, in order for a person to be a valid shliach on behalf of the recipient has to assent to that person's proxyship. And here there's no assent. So the Gemara says, so Rav Shimi says, you see therefore a volitional mechanism can be used by GITTEN as well. He doesn't have to be a Baal Korcha, doesn't have to be a mechanism that works against her will in order for it to be valid. So the Gemara says, V'abaya atu shlichus miyada israbi mi v'shilach v'shilecha israbi. But Abaya's response to that is that shlichus is a special case, because as we'll see later on, the Torah derives from an extra letter hey in the word v'shilecha that a person can divorce his wife via a shaliach, even against her will. So that's not derived from a mechanism of acquiring a get by putting it in her hand. It's a special case, and therefore you can't bring that as an argument against my argument. V'ibayis ema shlichus lekabolanami ashkechan bal karcha shekain av mekabel get labito ketana bal karcha. Alternatively, says the Gemara, even shlichus, to use a shaliach to divorce a woman against her will, we do find that it's a mechanism that can be used bal korcha, that can go against her will, because we have a precedent for it. A father can accept a get on behalf of his daughter against her will, without her volition. So we see therefore that there is such the mechanism of shlichus, even on behalf of the woman, is a mechanism that is non-volitional, that goes against her will, and therefore it works in all cases, even when the husband appoints a shaliach and says, give this my wife the get against her will, even though you wanted to argue that shlichus normally does not work when a woman is not consenting to that shlichus, but you see that in certain cases it does work when she's not consenting, and therefore it works in all cases. But Abaya's argument still stands. Abaya's argument is gifting someone a chatzner should not be a proper mechanism in order for her to be divorced. That's the argument that he makes against Rabbi. Next, we leave that unresolved. That's just the machlokas. Al ha'olah shel zayis v'chulei. The next part of the Mishnah said that you're allowed to write a get on an olive leaf, and you can write it on a cow, and you can write it on an eved. As long as you give her those items, she is thereby divorced. Tosfos, by the way, points out that an olive leaf has to be something like an olive leaf. It can't be any foliage. It can only be a foliage that's not going to shrivel over the course of time. It has to be something that's a bar kayama. So the Gemara's not going on that. The Gemara is going to be talking about another issue, which is, why do you have to give her the whole cow? Why can't you just give her the horn? If the get's written on the horn. So the Gemara says, Bishlam yad de eved lo efshel miktzayeh. I can understand why if you write the get on the Eved's hand, or this arm, you can't cut off the arm of the Eved. Not only is that inhumane, but simply it's a mechanism that won't work, because the law of the Torah is that once you maim an Eved, the Eved goes free, and you therefore can't use him anymore to divorce your wife. So therefore I can understand why you have to give her the whole eved. But with the cow, why not economize? If you wrote the get on the horn of the cow, just cut off the horn and give her the horn. Why do you have to give her the whole cow? That's the Gemara's question. So, Amar Kra v'chasa v'nasan la mi she'ena mechusar el ksiva unesina yatzah zeh shemechusar ksiva kitzitza unesina. So the Gemara answers very simply. The Torah says two verbs. V'chasav la sefer krisus v'nasan biyada. You shall write for her a book of severance and then place it in her hand. There can therefore be no intermediary requirement or action that needs to be taken between the writing and the giving. And therefore, if you needed to do something in order for this get to be able to give to her, then it would invalidate the process. Here, therefore, if you're going to tell me that I want to divorce my wife with the horn, not with the cow, not with the whole cow, you'd have to cut off the horn first, and that is an additional action that invalidates the necessity of these two actions to be done adjacent to each other, and that's why you can't cut off the horn. If you were to cut off the horn first and then write the get, and give it to your wife, no problem. But if you're writing it on a living cow, then you have to give her the whole cow. Okay, let us go on. Rabbi Yossi Haglili Omer V'chuli. Rabbi Yossi Haglili had said, I hold that a get cannot be written on a cow or on an eved and given to a woman that way, nor can it be written on any food item. So my time at Rabbi Yossi Haglili, what's his reasoning? The Tanya Sefer. Ainli Ela Sefer minayin l'rabos kol davar. Because if you look again at the pasuk, the Torah says, V'chasav la sefer krisus v'nosan biyada. He shall write for her a scroll of severance and place it in her hand. So what Rabbi Yossi Haglili looks at that pasuk and he says the word sefer is a very important word. It's a scroll. So that means that it seems like you can only use a scroll to divorce your wife. So minayin l'rabos kol davar. How do you know that other substances can be used as long as you can write on them? Talmud lomar v'chasav lo mikol makom. Because the Torah says he shall write for her. Now that's unnecessary for the Torah to write. The Torah could have just said, V'nosan la sefer krisus, give her a scroll of severance. Why does it have to say write for her? That implies that any substance that you can write on is valid for a get. It doesn't have to be a scroll. So then imkain ma tamul lomar sefer. So then why is the word scroll written? Ma sefer davar she'ein bo ruach chaim ve'eno ochel. Av kol davar she'ein bo ruach chaim ve'eno ochel. Basically, the way Rabbi Yossi looks at the pasuk, he says like this: the Torah, it's almost like a klalu prat. The Torah is telling you that you can really write a get on any substance as long as it's analogous to a sefer, as long as it's analogous to a scroll. Just like a scroll is not living and it's not edible, so too a get can be written on any surface, provided that it's somewhat analogous to a scroll, that it's not alive and it's not edible. So v'rabbanan, and how do the Rabbanan look at the psukim? Obviously they say that it could be written on an animal. He says, Iksiv basefer kidaka amart. The Torah doesn't say the chasav la bisefer krisus. It doesn't say he shall write it to her in or upon a scroll. It says he shall write for her a scroll. The word sefer, therefore, does not really indicate what the substance you're supposed to write on, but it's rather indicating the nature of the text. The word sefer, according to the Chachamim, means sipur, from the word sipur, that the get has to actually indicate what is taking place. It has to be a narrative, is what the Gemara is saying. It has to be such and such a person has decided that he's going to divorce such and such a lady in such and such a place, etc. So it's got nothing to do with the substance, and therefore the question now is, V'rabbanan hai v'chasav my abdilay. Once the word sefer does not indicate the substance, why do you need a reboy, an inclusive clause of v'chasav law, that you can write it on any substance? If the Torah does not address the substance, then why do you need the words v'chasav law to indicate it can be more than a scroll, if the Torah does not indicate that it has to be a scroll? The Gemara answers, miboy lahu b'chsiva miskareshes ve'ena miskareshes b'kesef. So they tell me that's for a totally separate halacha. V'chasav law is to indicate to me that the only way to divorce a woman is by writing something down, and to exclude the possibility that you could divorce a woman by giving her cash. Because salka daita chamina akish yitzia lahavaya ma havaya bekesef af yitzia nami bekesef kamash malon. Because I might have thought, and we find this in Maseches Kiddushin and in other places, that the Torah scripturally connects divorce and marriage. And therefore you might have thought that just like marriage can be consummated both through kesef and through shtar, so too a get can be consummated through kesef and shtar. And therefore you need a special pasuk to tell me, v'chasav la, no, you have to dafka write, you cannot divorce a woman through cash. V'idach nafgale mi sefer krisus, sefer karsa, vein davar acher karsa. So where does Rabbi Yossi learn it from? If he's learning v'chasav la for another purpose, so where does he learn out that you can only divorce a wife through shtar and not through cash? He learns it from the word sefer krisus, the two words together, a scroll of severance. From those two words you see that only a scroll can sever the relationship and not cash. V'idach mi boile, and the Chachamim look at the word sefer krisus to teach me something else. Davar hakores beino leveina. Those words teach me, when they're put together, teach me that the nature of the get has to create absolute severance. It cannot create contingent or tentative severance. What do we mean by that? We've seen this before. Kidatanya, as the Brisa says, Hareze gitech almana shelo tishti yayin almana shelo telchi lebeis avich laolam ein ze krisus. He says, let's say a man were to give his wife a get, but it's with the following condition. Now, you can put conditions in a get according to the Gemara. You can say, I'm only divorcing you on the condition that you give me a piece of property, right? You're allowed to, right? Or on the condition, that you're usher to something. But what if a man writes a get to his wife on the following condition? This is your get on the condition that you never drink wine again. This is your get on the condition that you never go to your father's house ever again. That's not a valid get. Why is it not a valid get? Because there's no way of determining whether she'll fulfill the condition for the rest of her life. So it's a tentative severance. Because if she were to go ahead and have a sip of wine, it would completely undo the severance. So it's a completely tentative severance that does not create absolute a break between the husband and the wife. And therefore, by contrast, if, however, he says to her, Almanah shalot ad shloshim yom hareze krisus. If, however, he says to her, this is your get, provided that you don't drink wine or you don't go to your father's house from now for the next 30 days, then halachically it is a valid divorce, because that's something it's tentative, but only for 30 days. And there's a finite amount of severance that is ascertainable, because once 30 days have elapsed, you'll be able to determine whether she was able to fulfill the condition of the get. When there's no way to determine whether she's going to fulfill the condition of the get for the rest of her life, then it's not a valid severance. But if a husband puts a deadline on the Tanai, so then it is a valid get. That's what the pasuk of Sefer Krisus is coming to teach, according to Rabbi Yossi, according to the Chachamim. And the Gemara says, "V'idach mikares Krisus." And where did the Chachamim learn that din of has to create non-tentative severance? Rabbi Yossi learns it out from the plural. Instead of the Torah writes Krisus instead of writing kares. So you learn actually both things. You learn the din that it needs to be a scroll that creates the divorce, meaning that it can't be through cash. And you also learn the second halacha, that it can't be a tentative krisus. And v'idach, and the Chachamim will tell you, kares krisus lo darshi. They don't see that. The word krisus to them, it does not teach a plurality of law. It only teaches one law.
So what's the outer time limit in terms of having control?
There is no outer time limit, as long as there is a time limit.
Wow. 5 years.
You can say 5 years, you can say 20 years.
Wow.
It's still a tentative divorce, but it's a definitive.
Yeah.
In other words, there is some kind of time limit. Next Mishnah. Ein kosvin b'mechuber lekarka, kaspa b'mechuber tolsha v'chasma v'nasno lakasha. These two statements seem to contradict each other. The first statement is that you cannot write a get on a substance that is attached to the ground. But if you do, and then you sign on it and give it to her, the witnesses sign on it and you give it to her, it's kosher. Now, if you just told me that you can't, why now do you tell me that it's kosher? So the Gemara will address this. Rabbi Yehuda posel ad shetei ksivasa v'chasimasa b'toshin. Rabbi Yehuda says no. It's puzzle. Even if you wrote a portion of the get while it was attached to the ground, it's only going to be kosher if it's the complete writing and the complete signing is on a substance that's detached from the ground. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira Omer, Ein kos v'lo aniyar hamachuk v'lo ala difter mipnei shu yachol lizdayev. Another halacha is Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says you cannot write the get on a substance where forgery is not detectable. So therefore, if you take a piece of parchment that has already had writing on it and has been erased, you can't write a get on that, because if you were to erase it again, no one would be able to detect that. And diphthera is also a type of parchment, which we'll learn about later, which also forgery is not detectable. However, the Chachamim say that is kosher. Let's take a look, though, on the first halacha. Kasval ha'mechuber. If you write it on something that's attached to the ground, it's not kosher. But wait a minute, b'di'evet it's kosher. V'ha'amart reisha ein kosvin. The reisha says you're not allowed to do that. So Amar of Yehuda Amar Shmuel v'hu shashir makom hatoref. The answer is that according to Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, we're talking about a case where you only wrote a portion of the text of the get. You only wrote the tofes, but you didn't write the toref. The tofes is the generic part of the get, and the toref is the first part, which includes the man's name, the woman's name, the city, the date, and so forth. V'chein Amar Rabbi Lazar, Amar Raboshi, Avahu Shashir, Makom HaToref. As long as that part is written on a detached substance, even if the generic part was written on an attached substance, it's still kosher. V'chein Amar Rabba Bar Bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yechanan, Vahu Shashir Makom HaToref, Rabbi Lazari. And this goes according to Rabbi Elazar, the Amar Ede Mesira Karti. And Rabbi Elazar says that the signature of the witnesses on the shtar is not essential, because Rabbi Elazar had said that it is the Ede Mesira, the witnesses are essential on the witnessing of the delivery of the get, but their signatures are not vital. As long as they witness the delivery of the get, even a get without any signatures on it is still valid as long as you have witnesses of the delivery. And therefore, if we're going to be differentiating between different parts of the get, we need to differentiate in the text itself. Therefore, as long as only the generic part of the get is written on an attached substance, as long as you detach it before writing the specifics of the name and the place and the date and so forth, it's going to be kosher. And therefore, you read the Mishnah as follows: V'hachi kamar, ein kosvin toifes shema yichtov toref. That therefore you're not allowed to write the tofes, you're not allowed to write the generic parts, lest on an attached substance, lest the next time you write a get, you'll even write the specific parts on a attached substance. And therefore, b'di'evid, if you only wrote the generic parts of the get when it was still attached, you then detached it and wrote the toref and wrote the the specific parts, so then b'di'evid that get is kosher. Bereish Lakish says, I have a different way of reading the Mishnah. Amar chasmu shaninu, he says, it says in the Mishnah, as long as it was signed on a detached substance, it's kosher. So what does chasmu mean? V'Reb Meir hi da'amar edei chasim akarti v'achi kamar. And our Mishnah is going like Rabbi Meir, who says that no, the signatures of the witnesses in the get is essential. And therefore you read it as follows: Ein kosvin toref gzera shema yachtam, that you're not allowed to write any text of the get on an attached substance, even though the most essential part is the signatures. And technically, as long as the signatures were on a detached substance and you had written everything else on an attached substance, it would be okay. But lechatchila, you can't write any part of the get on an attached substance, lest you come to let the witnesses sign the attached substance. However, b'di'evid kasvu l'torev tol shma chasmu benasnu la kosher. If b'di'evid you wrote the text of the get and then you detached it from the ground and you had the witnesses sign it at that point, b'di'evid it's kosher.
Is the problem with mechuber there's an interruption with the nesina?
That's a good question. It doesn't seem to be that way. It seems that the chisaron is that it's not a sefer. Either because it's not a sefer, or
that the essential.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry.
The essential writing has taken place. The essential
Ruvain is correct. Ruvain is correct. It says, Rashi says on the Mishnah, Dichsiv v'kasa v'nasan she'ena mechusar kitzitza. Rashi says that there has to be the writing, and then immediately after there has to be the giving. If you need to uproot it, you need to do an action before you can give it to her. The assumption is you can't give someone. Giving implies something that is movable and not attached to the ground to be transferred from one person to the next. That's the only way you can give. So if you're writing it on an attached substance, it's not. You'd have to uproot it before you can give it to her, and therefore it creates a separation between the two actions of writing and giving. Okay?
Right. So that's why the Gemara is answering that the essential writing is taking place.
As long as the essential writing has taken place after the detachment, it's kosher.
So Raizel, who says that the important Edom are the Edom that come later, the delivery, the Masira, he actually requires more writing to take place on severed.
He requires some of the actual text of the get to be written on detached substance. Whereas according to Rameir, it's only the signatures, exactly. Next, based on this, kasvu al cheres shel atzitz nakov kosher, d'shakol v'yahiv le'nihala, that if a person were to write a get on a pot, a flower pot, let's say, that the flower pot has holes on the bottom, so it's somewhat partially connected to the ground, but it's still removable from the ground. So we allow that. If you write it on the side of the pottery, as long as you lift up the whole flower pot and give it to her, that's a kosher a get. And however, al ole shel atzitz nakov, abaya amar kasher v'rav amar pasel. But what if you were to write a get on a leaf that's growing out of a flower pot, okay, that is porous on the bottom, so it's somewhat connected to the ground, but it's really detachable from, it's really in a sense detached also. So this is where you have a machlokas. Abaya says it's kosher, and Rabbi says it's pasel. Abaya amar kosher, the shakule v'yahiv le'nihala. Abaya says it's kosher. Why? Because by just lifting up the flower pot, you've demonstrated that this leaf is part of a structure that is detached from the ground, and therefore it's a valid get. However, Rava Amar Pasel Gezerah Shema Yiktam. Rava says it's pasel. Why? Because you might be tempted to, after writing it on that leaf, just tear off the leaf and give it to her. And in doing so, since the rest of the flower pot is still, in a sense, connected to the ground, it is a get that was written in its entirety on an attached substance, and therefore it invalidates the get. We'll hold it here for today.